What we've seen with most of the elections that we've had recently is a growing distrust from ordinary, regular people, not hyper-partisan, where the outcome for them becomes in question. I don't think that it has to necessarily be a partisan issue. I'd hope that it does not become a partisan issue. Free and fair and transparent elections should be a staple of American democracy. I think we could all agree that if we vote, we want to make sure that the vote counts and that you can validate that vote counted. This allows them to validate the signatures. There's a severe lack of trust that can grow when you see an instance where someone literally draws a snowman and then that snowman passes as a signature when you see the signature right next to it.
I understand the need to make sure that people are able to see what's going on, but I'm very concerned that that's not defined in statute, because if someone, what's reasonable and comfortable for me, maybe I have better eyesight, I might be able to stand further away, someone else might need to be closer. What happens if someone interferes in the process, if they're right there next to them? How is that accounted for?
In terms of the reasonably and comfortably, I want to draw a distinction between observation and challengers, because isn't it quite true that under the statute that allows for observation, it is the case that counties are also required to allow members of the public in general to fully observe. If observers were doing any hanky-panky that affected independence or whatever, independent observers would have the right to be present and to report that to law enforcement and security.
I have an engineering degree. I live in Maricopa County, and I'm here to speak on my own behalf. Before the 2020 primary, I was briefly employed by the county as a signature verifier, so I went through the training. In spite of the existing statutes, I was surprised to learn that there are several parts of the process without any oversight or accountability. Currently, first-level signature verification can be observed by bipartisan observers. However, the observers have no authority to challenge or deal with any problems that they see. Okay, so beyond first level, second and third level, also called the manager's queue, there is no provision for observers. That part of the process is not observed at all. The managers may pass a signature that was rejected by first level, and there's no accountability or no observation of that part of the process. For anything that makes it through first and second level that remains rejected, that ballot goes into curing, and for the curing part of the process, there is, for 20% of that process, 20% of the people who do that, there is an opportunity for observation, although that's not formalized. That's informal. And for 80% of the cures, and there's absolutely no observation for that part of the process.
My name is Alan Skillicorn. I have actually sat behind those screens and watched the signatures. But there's just a couple things that I want to quickly go over. That is, as policy wonks, we should be interested in getting rid of distrust, and we should be interested in getting rid of cynicism of elections. I see this as an excellent tool to do so. I think it's an excellent opportunity to have both of the major parties sitting there observing.
I live in Yavapai County, Prescott, Arizona, and it's a rural community. I was a candidate for LD1 for the Arizona State Senate in the primary for 2022. I walked into the elections office to ask the recorder some questions about election processing. While I was there, I observed the following firsthand. There was a glass screen between the area where the public was and the people that were working in the elections department. In the lobby, a person showed up and said, "I've been identified as one of the observers for the GOP." Asked a question. There was no Democrat because the Democrat Party did not identify anyone to be an observer. What the observer could see was, through the screen, 15 or 20 feet on the other side, were two cubicles with computers. The back of the monitors were visible, and heads were popping up above the monitor. That's all the observer could see. When I challenged this to the officer in charge of elections, I was told, "There's nothing wrong with this. We're following the election procedures manual. The observer can see the people, and they are verifying signatures. That's what they're doing right now, and we're not going to change anything," and they continue to do that throughout the process. So I am an elector. I did challenge the process, and I was told, too bad. The observers could not see anything. This bill needs to be passed. It's horrible. The actual signature verification process is not being observed.
Elections have definitely become a hot button issue, and The reality is there tends to be a split, but really it doesn't matter whether you believe that all of this is a conspiracy theory and that anyone who who questions the election is out of their mind, or you believe that the election was totally fixed. That question is actually irrelevant to our committee. The real question is after the last two previous elections, they've done polling, and they show that a sizable portion of our electorate, on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, do not have confidence and faith in our election system. And the reason for that is because the system is opaque, and often the counties don't follow the law that they are required to follow. And so people are right to have questions and to be concerned about it. Observers are allowed to observe all of these, and yet county officers and election officials are not following the law, and there's very little movement from the courts or any other body to make sure that they do so. If a large percentage of our population does not have confidence in our election, that alone is a concern that the legislature needs to address and needs to take steps on.
It saddens me that we have to solidify law that is already there because the law isn't being followed. But any chance we have on this committee to instill that confidence, solidify the laws that should be followed, and make sure that there are penalties if they are not followed, I am going to be for that. I'm very, very happy to vote aye on this bill and think it should be a nonpartisan issue. If we're just trying to follow laws regarding signature verification, that is the only way to have ID on a mail-in ballot. If this is the only way that we can clarify that that is a legitimate ballot, if it's signatures, we need to make sure there is an observer every step of the process.
This bill is very simple. It's about transparency. All 15 counties are political subdivisions of the state of Arizona. This body here is the big brother of the counties. It's mom and dad. And we have to call balls and strikes. And so the legislature gets to set the law for signature verification reform when it's needed. And with that, I vote aye.
I'm concerned that we're allowing untrained observers into a secure process with a broadly defined statute. And with that, I vote no.
We are expected to look at this legislation through a nonpartisan lens, a fairness lens. The first speaker for the bill, I'm not sure if you could see it, had a sticker on his laptop that said, "We the People, Arizona Alliance." The second speaker for the bill was a volunteer for We the People, Arizona Alliance, and a volunteer at the 2020 Senate audit. The third and fourth and fifth speakers for the bill were, I'm not sure if they participated with that organization, but I believe they are all Republicans. The sponsor of this bill and the co-sponsors of this bill are all Republicans. How are we expected to look at this through a nonpartisan lens, and now it's passing on a party line vote? Let me make myself clear. Our elections are safe and secure. There is room to strengthen our election foundation with meaningful and data-backed changes, but the proposed bill today is tied closely to conspiracy theories and is creating more problems than it is perceived to be solving, so I vote nay.
In terms of the question about how to look at it from a nonpartisan lens, I at least like to think that I would vote the same way if the furthest left member of the caucus introduced a bill as if the furthest right member of the caucus introduced the same bill. Maybe it's my background as a lawyer, but I can read the law for itself without looking at who the sponsor is. And I can figure out whether I like it or I don't. And so I think the question before this body is simply, do we like our current laws? Do we want to make it absolutely clear that these laws need to be followed and that the public should have some oversight in the process? And I think the answer to that question is yes. I believe very strongly in the constitutional protection of defendants and the principle of innocent until proven guilty. For people. For the government, I have a different standard. And my standard is this. The government is guilty until it's proven innocent. Because power corrupts. Corrupts absolutely. And so what our goal is on this committee is to provide mechanisms whereby people don't need to trust the government, where they don't need to take the government's word for it, because they might very rationally doubt that word. But instead, that they can see for themselves what Representative Hernandez already believes, that they can see whether or not our elections are safe and secure. And if the answer is yes, Representative Hernandez will have a good laugh at our expense, and perhaps deservedly so. But at least then, the people who doubt now will have confidence, and that will be a better America for all of us. With that, Madam Chair, I do vote aye.
I wasn't going to spend any more time explaining my vote, but I feel a need to respond to some of the allegations that were made. I would just like, for the record, to establish that the ranking minority leader has been invited to our agenda settings at my discretion. She has a week to prepare. The other side has been told repeatedly that they are allowed to submit a preferred list of witnesses, and we will call on their preferred list. We'll give them priority when we're talking about those opposing a bill. The bill language has been posted. This bill was on the agenda last week. It was postponed for an additional week. There have been numerous weeks of time to prepare any counter arguments. I think it's very sad that this is passing party line, but that is the fault of the Democrats, not the Republicans. We've given you ample time to prepare, and we give you plenty of time to speak on issues. So with that, I vote aye.